I'll hand it off to the substance of the morning with Andrew Dye. Okay, Andrew Dye, Jobs Ohio, Global Perspectives.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be with you all again today. I'm going to essentially double-click into one specific aspect of the Jobs Ohio operation. JP, our CEO, mentioned it yesterday. Just real quick recap. You heard from JP about Ohio's economic development strategy, what Jobs Ohio's role is. We're about 120 people. But we've got a dedicated team specifically focused on global initiatives. And kind of the goal this morning is to give you a peek into what that looks like. And Mark did mention we have the opportunity to make asks. So I think my ask of the group will be, once you hear this and absorb it, if there are new relationships that you think might consider Ohio, we'd be happy to talk to them. So with that, Anand, if you could click to the first slide. So again, we've got a dedicated team on international. I have 4 roles at Jobs Ohio: strategy, business development, data, and research. Came to the company about 5 years ago. Was a former investment banker, but I grew up in Ohio and did investment banking to my mid-30s and wanted to do something. I joke, I was filling my wallet and emptying my soul, so I left that behind. I moved back and lead those areas of Jobs Ohio. So this is our international team. Alina runs Europe. She speaks 5 languages. She's great. Amy, I call it always on Amy. She leads a lot of our Asia activity, Korea, China, Japan, et cetera. And Justin oversees that group and brings a lot of expertise to the role. So next slide. So JP mentioned we had 10 presence in 10 international markets. Anand, next. So why are we interested in this? So FDI, foreign direct investment, it's added almost 100,000 jobs in Ohio over the past decade. So back in 2012, we were just under 200,000 jobs, and now we're well over 250, getting close to 300,000, depending on what statistical source you use. The breakdown of that is about a third from Japan, and then close second, UK and Germany, Canada, France, Ireland, et cetera. Next. So we've built up a strong global network. We're a member of the World Economic Forum. We've hosted the Kadanrin from Japan. BCIU is a unique group, if any of you are members. Very high quality events they do. But the whole idea is to create a catchment network of new opportunities. We even hosted the UN, some of their senior procurement folks years ago, Mark, partnering with the Cleveland Clinic on global health initiatives. So we do top-down and bottom-up type work, and this is sort of the top-down, building the funnel. Next slide. Ohio has 7 sister states. So Saitama in Japan, many of you may have seen that on the Olympics. They hosted a number of the events. That relationship's 30 years old. Hubei province in China, that relationship's over 40 years old. Taiwan, and then partnerships in Austria, Brazil, Nigeria. Next. This didn't come out well, but it's not just at the state level. So just to give you a sense on Japan, all these small towns and some large towns in Ohio have partnerships with Japanese cities. Next. The same can be said with the UK. Again, sorry this didn't show right, but Mark will get you the content so you can see all these partnerships. Next. All right, so what's driving the Japan? And I think Matt McAllister from One Columbus will get into this more in terms of how important FDI is to Columbus. But a lot of the southern states get attention for attracting a Kia or a new auto plant. Well, Ohio was the first to do that. It was in the early 1980s with Honda. They make the Accord, a lot of Acura products. They have the second largest R&D center in the world in the central Ohio region. But you can see they're Ohio's largest employer. I'm just curious, how many of you knew that the largest employer in Ohio was Honda? So that, very good. Well, Mark, if you bring the group back, there's all sorts of smart mobility activity out towards Marysville, a lot of connected autonomous vehicle work. Next. So Jobs Ohio, we're in the deal business, the projects business. And so we kind of get measured on 3 things: new leads, first-time visits to Ohio, Again, if you all haven't been to Jobs Ohio, it's kind of like Ohio Showroom. It's a great space to welcome a company from wherever in the world. But our kind of track record on the right just shows you how many projects we've done. So Japan, over the past decade, is top at 150. The UK, Germany, Canada, kind of all in the 50 and 60 range. So this is why I'm calling Ohio the global heartland. It's not always painted that in the mainstream media, but we have a tremendous global presence here in the form of FDI. So before I turn it over to Matt, I just share a few case studies of success stories. So next slide. So industry by industry and then country overlaid. So here are just logos of, let's just pick energy and chemicals. So Advanced Power's built a lot of power plants here. INEOS has a major plant here. Siemens has done a lot. Saint-Gobain. You see all the logos, but it's pretty amazing, this matrix can be filled out the way it can. Next. So Ultium Cells is probably the biggest related FDI project. LG Chem out of South Korea. This deal has been in the national news a lot. It's in Northeast Ohio, and they are building a lithium-ion battery cell production. So this is timely, Mark, since you are headed to Northeast Ohio later today. Next slide. Fuyao Glass America in Moraine. This, again, was an old GM plant that had been vacated, and it was available. We put in about $10 million to get the property redeveloped, and now Fuyao employs several thousand workers. If you all are Netflix watchers, American Factory on Netflix is a movie that was made about this deal and some of the contrasts and intricacies of the U.S.-China economic relationship. So worth a watch if you haven't seen it. Next. Yeah, so each deal, we look at it on a unique basis, and what are we solving for? We're trying to solve for winning the project. In that case, the property needed a lot of cleanup, and so a lot of the funds we put in went to help get that property ready. I think we also put in tax credits and a workforce grant, which could offset some of the training costs. But we deployed different tools on different deals. In that case, that was probably the biggest profile deal in our early years. That was done in 2014, 2015. Next. So if you go back one. So this is one from Spain. So Saica is a multi-billion-dollar paper company in Zaragoza, Spain. They have chosen Ohio for a new paper plant in Hamilton. This is a great story. Hamilton used to be a huge paper related economy. They had lost some of that, and now it's coming back. But we had the chairman and CEO here a couple weeks ago. Great people. I can't say enough positive things about Saica. But I think, another example of us being the global heartland. Next. This is a great tech story, and then one on inclusion. Autocon. Anyone familiar with Autocon? They do tech-related services for people on the autism spectrum. And so Autocon chose Columbus for their operation. You can see they are putting 50 people here. We put in, Mark, this is another good example. We put in $300,000 in what's called talent services, and that's to help them find the people. So it's an in-kind service, not charged to the company, but we're helping them find the people. So we can market the jobs. We can connect them with partners. So our talent team, you heard from Christy Klaus yesterday, they've weaved together all the different talent groups in the state, and they can bring them in on a project, and hey, maybe we can fund them growing a specific degree or credential. So if you take one thing away, Ohio's the global heartland. We've got over 300,000 people in foreign companies or global companies. If you have relationships overseas and you think they are looking for an outpost in the Midwest or in the U.S., we have all sorts of services we can offer. We've got the team on standby to do it. Some of you may have met Amy last night at dinner. But thank you for your time. I hope the rest of your time in Ohio is as successful as the past few days have been. And I think now we'll get into a little more detail on Central Ohio, which has added over 100,000 people over the past decade. So thank you, Mark.
Thanks. Maybe I should start with saying that if Ohio is the heart of the heartland, then Columbus is the heart of Ohio, because we are centrally located, a lot of different assets. We could move on to the first slide. So I want to start with just a little bit of information about our organization, because while we're associated with Jobs Ohio, each of the regions, there's 6 regional organizations around the state, all are organized slightly different. We're a private nonprofit organization focused on development of the community. But with that said, the majority of our funding actually comes from the private sector. We have about 300 private companies that fund the majority of our resources, our annual resources. They make an annual contribution, and we call them investors, but they're really investing in our goals and our vision. And our vision is to become the most prosperous region in the United States. And you can see how we define prosperity there. But basically, it really is about lifting more and more people in the region out of poverty and putting them in better economic situation. Next slide. And every organization has some different things that they focus on. Ours really come down to 6 elements. Number 1 is serving our existing companies, making sure that they stay, grow in our region. So we spend a lot of time meeting one-on-one with the companies that are in our marketplace, understanding if there is an opportunity for growth, if there's a risk to closure, and then we try to engage and mitigate any losses and accelerate any opportunities for growth. Of course, attracting new industry is also a key part of what we do. And as a matter of fact, it's something that we've been quite successful with here in Central Ohio. When you think about a pipeline of projects that a region works on, typically, a region would maybe have 50-50, 50% new attraction projects, 50% expansion projects. We're typically 80-20. 80% of the projects that we're working on are new attraction, about 20% are existing industry. Now, that's changed a little bit with the pandemic. We do a lot of international work, which has really been shut down. We're probably closer to 70-30 right now, but that trend's returning, and so we're starting to see it. And I think this time next year we'll probably be back to another 80-20, where 80% of the projects we're working on would be new to our region, new investment. Supporting entrepreneurship is also a big part of what we do. I'll talk a little bit about Rev 1 in a minute, but that's our main organization locally that does a lot of our seed funding. They also do acceleration and incubation services. They're located over by Ohio State. They also have relationships with a number of our communities around our region, where they operate incubators in places like New Albany and Dublin and so forth as well. Preparing communities to win. This is really about how we engage with our local partners. So I mentioned we have about 300 private sector partners. We have about 35 local partners that also fund us. These are the cities of, the county of. And so we actually have programs that are designed to help those companies be prepared to win projects. Things like site readiness. Do they have sites? Do they have speculative buildings ready for a company to move into? Are they prepared to pitch their community when they have a consultant or a company coming in? So these are all things that we work with our local communities to prepare them to win. Increasing global trade and investment as well. And this is a broad category. It's everything from just what it sounds like. We actually have export assistance programs where if we can help our companies export, obviously we get a more global share. They can grow locally. But it's also about some critical things like air service development, getting air connections internationally, getting cargo connections. Something we've been very successful with since the pandemic is attracting new global international air service on the cargo side. We have one of the largest inland ports just to the south of Columbus called Rickenbacker, and it is off the charts as it relates to cargo growth. And a lot of it is flights that are being removed from places like New York, LaGuardia, Chicago, because of the lack of belly freight coming in, more needing to be moved to pure freighters, and it's just a better option for a pure freighter. So there's a lot of areas that we're working in as it relates to increasing global trade investment. And then obviously, we market and promote globally our region. And that's something that most organizations they're going to come out first and foremost and say, well, our goal is to market the region. We do that, but we look at it as a secondary element to really kind of what we're doing as it relates to attracting new industry and working with our existing companies first and foremost. There's a couple things. So if you're a freighter, you do have to defer to passenger flights. So they can circle, and circling burns fuel, and literally hundreds of thousands of dollars can be saved by coming into a cargo dedicated airport. And then there's the time. Right now, there's stuff that gets stuck on the tarmac, literally, in some of the major hubs, and it comes in, it gets off the tarmac very quickly. Matter of fact, we have some of our companies that are bringing product into Rickenbacker can get it into their warehouses in Chicago faster than they can when they bring it in directly to Chicago and go from the airport to the warehouse. So that just gives you just a couple examples of why. But it's definitely an area that we continue to grow because with the supply chain disruption, we saw a tremendous shift. I mean, obviously PPE was coming in via air, but a lot of auto parts are starting to come in by air. You can't stop the automotive line, and if you can't get it in through your normal channels over the ocean, you got to start moving to air. So those are all things that are really impacting the growth right now. Next slide. I would say our structure service has served us very well. And our relationship with Jobs Ohio is a critical component of our structure as well. We're one of the 6 regional organizations. We call the Jobs Ohio Network partner. And we receive funding from Jobs Ohio to provide certain services to the companies in our region, as well as I mentioned our private sector investment and then our communities investment. So where are we today? And I apologize, there's a state around the amoeba-looking red spot there, but the red spot is the 11 counties that we cover, which is right in the middle of the state of Ohio. But today, where are we? So we're number 1 metropolitan area in the Midwest for population growth. We're number 1 for job growth. And we're also number 1 for GDP growth. And that's looking from 2010 to 2020 data. We were formed in 2009 as an organization to accelerate the economic development activity in our region. We had a goal of 150,000 net new jobs, $8 billion in capital investment. We blew all of that out of the water. We had significantly greater than the 150,000 net new jobs, and we were probably close to 12 billion in capital investment over that period. So in 2020, we started on a new route, and we changed our name. We were Columbus 2020 before. We learned you never put an expiration date in your name. And now we're One Columbus, and I think we're going to keep hold of this one for a while. Our metropolitan population is 2.5 million now, and our city of Columbus is just over 900,000. To put that into perspective, Cleveland's about 380,000 people, and Cincinnati's about 300,000 people. So we're larger than the cities combined. We're about the same size as Cincinnati's metropolitan area, though. Obviously, they have a lot of metro growth where we've had a lot of city growth in Columbus. And I was talking earlier about this. We're projected to add 1 million people, 1 million more people by 2050. And that's an anomaly for a Midwest Tier 2 city. That's typically reserved for some of our larger Tier 1 cities in the Midwest, but as a Tier 2 city, we're going to be leading the pack as it relates to growth. Next slide. Well, Chicago's the main Tier 1 city in the Midwest. I mean, everything outside of Chicago is probably considered a Tier 2 across the Midwest. And so this is a little hard to see as well, but this is our population growth and our job growth compared to many of those other cities that we commonly compete with in the Midwest. And you can see we're leading both in population growth and job growth. And you know, this is again through 2020. I can tell you in 2021, our population has accelerated. We have had a tremendous amount of individuals that have moved back during the pandemic to the market. They've found employment here. Some of them have been moved back by their employers that had operations in our market from some of the larger coastal operations. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what drives our economy. And so here's just, there's two ways I want to look at it. One of them is by who's headquartered here. So Fortune, you know, there's 16 Fortune 1000 companies that are headquartered in our market. Fortune 500 are on the left. L Brands is the one you can't see, obviously. That's been split recently. It's now Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, two separate companies. So it probably won't be a Fortune 500, but it might be two Fortune 1000 companies in the next round of Fortune rankings. But notable headquarters, we have Alliance, Patel, some companies you may not be familiar with, like Root, Cover My Meds, but they're some of our largest and fastest growing companies. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then obviously we have major operations as well. Companies that aren't headquartered here, but literally have significant operations, like Honda, our largest manufacturer, about 10,000 people. In our region, there's some that are outside of our region as well. But Abbott, IBM, Amazon, Google, Upstart, which is another one I'll talk about in a minute, is, you know, a good example of some of the companies that are really driving our growth right now. Next slide. The other way to look at it is by sector, and I think this is one that really dives into one of the core elements of why we've been able to grow as a region, why we've been able to sustain growth. It's the economic diversity we have here. We're not over-reliant upon any industry sector. Matter of fact, there's not a single industry sector that employs more than 17% of our employment base. So if you think about a Detroit, you know, they had massive growth, automotive driven, they got hit hard, they had a massive decline. Ours has been steady growth, and it's because of the economic diversity that we have here. We have automotive and mobility, which historically was automotive, but to Andrew's point, we're shifting now to mobility. You know, we have operations like the Transportation Research Center here. It's the home of NHTSA. It's their only lab in the United States. So companies that want to do testing, it's one of the best places to do testing for autonomous technologies, driver assist technologies. And it's a fully independent testing facility as well. But, you know, we look at advanced manufacturing, finance and insurance is massive in our market. And, you know, people like Nationwide, Huntington Bank, JP Morgan Chase is our largest employer. I mentioned this earlier to a couple of you, but they have over 20,000 people in our marketplace, 5,000 technology workers. So all their customer-facing application development is done here. A lot of their enterprise level development is done here as well. So we have the stalwarts here, but we also have the next generation, the Root insurances, the upstarts are here as well. And they're leveraging a lot of the talent out of people like JP Morgan Chase and Nationwide Insurance. Retail and e-commerce is been growing exponentially. As a matter of fact, through the pandemic, one of our largest growth sectors has been e-commerce fulfillment. I won't go into that today, but if you drive around the community, you're going to see cranes in all of our suburban communities putting up bulk industrial buildings right now. Matter of fact, we're coming off of our last year was our largest year ever for delivery, bulk industrial speculative. This year we're going to surpass it. So there's a tremendous amount of growth in that sector. It's one I won't spend a lot of time on, but we also have DHL's North American headquarters is here, which is the driver behind a lot of those buildings, and a number of others. Biomedical and health services is a sector that is a growth opportunity for us, and then obviously advanced computing is one that's emerged recently for us as well. I want to talk a little bit more about these two in a second, so I won't spend too much time here. Next slide. I just also wanted to mention, Andrew mentioned this too, international companies are a significant portion of our work, and it also adds a lot of diversity to the companies that we have in the marketplace. And just as we have a lot of diversification among industry sectors, having that international investment also really helps insulate us from a lot of the global economic conditions. While no one's ever 100% secure, I feel like our approach to continuing to encourage international investment further helps us as it relates to insulation from downturns and so forth. And again, it's broad. We have everything from Honda and companies like Magna doing production to companies like Klarna and BMW Financial Services on the financial sector here. Next slide. So I wanted to do a little deeper dive into two, maybe three areas, but really what's driving our innovation. And then I want to give you kind of our technology elevator pitch because I know that you guys probably represent companies in a lot of different spaces, but I thought those might be the most relevant today. So, and again, this is just some samples of what I would consider topical points. But so Drive Capital is here. Drive Capital is the largest venture capital firm not on the coast. They have about $1 billion under investment now. They're just down the street on High Street here, and they have changed the perspective of our market single-handedly as it relates to technology investment. They've brought in a number of companies that they've invested in from around the Midwest and the East Coast, and they've brought those operations into our market, and they've thrived. And some of them I think they brought in kicking and screaming, but once they were here, they realized the value proposition. They've done quite well. Rev1 Ventures, I mentioned earlier, they are our seed fund. They also operate one of the larger angel networks in the country here. So they have a suite of dollars, some of them from the state, but they also are now running innovation funds for some of our larger companies. And that's something new that they've started in the past few years that have been pretty successful. So it's let's say an insurance provider in the market, instead of doing some of their own innovation, is providing funding directly to Rev1 to use their system to vet, fund, accelerate technology companies, and then they have a right to further invest in them. So, right now there's probably 3 or 4 various funds that they're managing, and they could be anywhere from $5 million, I think, to maybe $15 million in resources. Children's Nationwide Hospital has large research, and I kind of skipped over our bioscience sector, but they're really putting us on the map as it relates to gene and cell therapy. And so I'll talk a little more about it, but they are 5 years ago we weren't talking about this. 3 years ago we started to hear rumblings about it. Today it's all we can talk about, and we actually have a handful of projects I'll mention here in a minute directly related to spin-outs from that or associated with Children's Nationwide Hospital. And then Patel. Many of you are probably familiar with Patel Memorial Institute. They're the largest contract research organization in the world. They're headquartered here. They manage a lot of the national laboratories for the federal government. They've also been a steady stream of intellectual property that has been spun out into companies as well. They've been here for a long time. They've been at times under the radar, but now under some new leadership, they are becoming much more aggressive again as it relates to the innovation side of the business. And again, these are just a couple examples. There's many more venture firms here. There's others, but these are the big guys. Next slide. So one of the other things I wanted to talk a little bit about too is cloud computing. So if you have companies that are could benefit from low latency or require low latency, we're probably one of the top locations in the country for those operations. Amazon Web Services, Facebook, Google have now invested collectively billions of dollars in the market. They have thousands of acres under development right now for cloud computing centers in the marketplace. Google just announced a second round. AWS, I think, has 7 sites now, 6 sites in our market. And then Facebook has a major facility in New Albany. I think it's 500-600 acres, and it's going to be a 10-year build-out for Facebook. So this is a sector that we have a tremendous amount of chops in now, but we didn't 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This wasn't even on our radar as a opportunity for our market. And today, it's now spinning off a lot of corporate-owned data centers because they're like, well, if Facebook and Google are there, maybe we should have ours there. There must be something, energy prices are reasonable, low risk of natural disaster. I mean, the things that drive a lot of the investment in data centers and cloud computing centers make sense here. Next slide. Well, this is a map of the United States, and you can see a number of cities. What I wanted to just talk about here is the sheer amount of fundraising in 2020 that companies in our market were able to achieve. It's $673 million in VC funds secured by companies headquartered in the marketplace. Now, we have some that are not headquartered here as well that have large raises as well. But, this was a record year for us. 2018 was a record year. 2020 was now a record year. And if you want to hit the next slide, it looks like this is through June, and that's the far right of 2021. We could be on track to break our record again this year. And this is also give you an idea of some of the key areas. The light blue is healthcare. So again, as I mentioned, when we talk about companies like Forge Biologics, Sarepta, they were, 16, 17, they weren't really on the radar for us. But now you can see they're a bulk of it. And then financial services is the green one that also is quite prevalent in our market. And that's people like Root Insurance. Cover My Meds is in the blue. So it gives you an idea of some of the key companies in our market that have been ultra successful in raising funds. Next slide. Well, this is also a map of the United States. It's not showing up, but you can see that on the far eastern side of the United States is Columbus. We're one of the top 10 cities for the attraction and retention of millennial population, the 25 to 34 age group. Matter of fact, we're the only region east of the Mississippi that made the top 10 list. And, places that you would expect, Austin, Denver, Salt Lake, San Francisco, San Jose, LA, those are typical, expected locations for that type of growth. Columbus isn't. It's a bit of an anomaly, but it's one of our strengths. And we're also ranked number 12 in the country for the attraction, not just the retention, but the attraction of millennials. And a lot of the startup companies, a lot of those that have received, large tranches of VC are driving that attraction of the millennial population into the marketplace. Next slide. Everywhere. And I actually have a slide I took out that shows our in-migration. We are losing population to a handful of cities. The bulk of our growth is coming from places like Atlanta, Austin. We're getting a lot of growth out of Texas as well. And I think it's a lot of companies that have established operations in some of those key markets. And when they look for kind of the next frontier of where they want to put a tech office, we're on that radar. So we're getting people moving for the job. They have the job in a city. They're moving to Columbus to retain the job, to maybe start the office here, to take a leadership position, those sorts of things. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, too, we have a tremendous academic network here. There's, probably 50 colleges and universities that have about 125 to 130,000 students enrolled at any given time. We graduate annually just over 22,000 graduates just in our region, just in our 11 county area. So that's also fueling a lot of our ability to retain that population because we have the jobs, we have high job growth, we have people that are coming from all over the state and quite frankly all over the world. Ohio State has one of the largest population of international students in the country, of any university. I think, pre-pandemic they were around 7,000, 8,000 international students out of their 68,000. So, that's it's more than 10%. So, there's a direct correlation, obviously, to our ability to get people in, get them educated, and keep them in the region. Next slide. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, so there is a tremendous amount of industry-sponsored research here, and that is one of the key drivers for innovation. It's, typically I think one of the, top, 15 public universities for industry-sponsored research. A lot of it's in the engineering program, so a lot of it is material sciences, and there are some new technologies coming out of the university. And I think that, while historically the number of patents has been relatively low, there's been a direct, focus on that with the past couple administrations at the university to innovate, and not just innovate for the sake of innovation, but innovate for the sake of driving corporate growth. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think that one is they are definitely generating a lot more technology. Their technology office is open. You can do intellectual scans if you're interested with the technology office. Rev 1 is teaming up with them now to take, and they're taking students out of the business school and coupling them with innovative ideas now, which wasn't necessarily happening aggressively before. I think that the double-edged sword part of it, though, is a lot of our research is industry-sponsored, so the industry retains the intellectual property. So there's a lot of great ideas that are coming out of the university, a lot of new technologies, new materials. But just to give you an idea, the number one sponsor for industry research at university is GE Aviation. Number 2 is Honda. So they're retaining a lot of that intellectual property that's being funded, little research. So I have 2 slides here. This is kind of where we get into our pitch. So, talent is number 1 with almost every company that we work with right now. And it's not the cost of talent, although that does come in later. It's the availability of talent. Can we get the people, number 1? That is the number 1 factor for almost every project that we work on. And as you can see, this is just for, graduates, but, things like IT, data science, related programs, business management, we're churning out in our region about 6,500 annual graduates. If you look at Ohio, 29,000, and if you look at a 3-hour radius, 85,000. I give you these numbers because we are really the highest growth region within that area, and we have the highest job growth, so we are legitimately attracting from a 3-hour drive. And a lot of our companies that are recruiting are going out to universities that are 3 hours away. Matter of fact, even some of them further out. There's 13 of the top 50 engineering schools in the Midwest. 4 of the top 10 are in the Midwest. And we legitimately recruit from all of those. Next slide. Same thing as it relates to engineering. I won't spend any time here. Next slide. This is actually the Midwest engineering slide. You can see there's, like I said, 13 of the top 50 engineering schools in the Midwest. Next slide. This is some data that we typically provide companies. Now this is the whole gamut of way we would look at what we would call our tech stack. But typically when we're working with a company, they may tell us, hey, we're interested in artificial intelligence machine learning. And what this tells you is that there's over 5,500 people currently working in that space in our marketplace. And this is typically, we get this data from LinkedIn. So these are certifications typically that people are self-reporting on their LinkedIn profile. But then we can go over and say, oh, and by the way, here are the top 5 companies or 10 companies in our region that are employing individuals in that space. So that if you're thinking about coming in and AI, machine learning is your business, you're going to know who your competition is or maybe who a partner is. So these are sorts of things that we can provide companies that are looking at our market that want to do a deeper dive on who's here doing the same sort of thing, employing the same sort of people. Next slide. And apologize for the eye chart here, but this is showing wage rates. And I think what I'll do is, you just have to trust me here, but maybe the bottom portion is the most important. We always compare ourselves. There's always, if we're involved, there's competition for a project. No one's just saying we're doing this in Columbus. We'll work on those, but it's not one that we're doing incentives for. And we're working really hard for, because if they're going to just do it here, they're going to do it here. So there's always competition. So one way to look at wage rates is, let's say a company comes to us and say, we're going to have a software developer, and we're going to pay on average $100,000 a year. We'd like to pay on average $100,000 a year. What does that mean in your market? Well, in our market, you're 50th percentile. You can see the 50th right here in red. What you can't see is if you're in Chicago, you're in the 42nd percentile, meaning 58% of employers are paying more than you. What else you can't see is San Jose, you're in the 13th percentile, meaning that 87% of employers are paying more than you. So you can hire as well a trained software developer for $100,000, and you're in the median in our market, or you're in the 13th percentile in San Jose. And there's a lot of things that drive that, obviously, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is really what it comes down to. Once a company is determined they can get the talent, and we demonstrate that through here's who's already employing them, here's who you're probably going to be attracting employees from, or here's a program that's you're going to be able to tap within the university, get the employees that you need. Next is price. How much is it going to cost me? And if we don't offer an advantage, we don't win a project. If we can't guarantee that we can help them get an employee through the program that Andrew was talking about, our talent attraction services, and we can't give an idea of the wage mitigation they're going to be able to achieve by moving into the Midwest and in Columbus specifically, then we're not going to win the project. Next slide. So a little bit about living here. Again, the bottom of this really tells the story. 77% of homes sold are affordable in our market compared to the median income. That's a stat that a lot of places can't spout. You look at a place like New York, San Jose, most people are going to rent forever. They're not going to own. Here, 77% of homes sold are affordable according to our median income. Average rents in our downtown are $1,269 a month, which is pretty outstanding. So these are some of the things that are really driving our overall cost of living. Matter of fact, our cost of living index is just over 90 here. 100 is average, so it's about 9-10% below the average community. But at the same time, you get access to world-class healthcare, some of the best public schools in the country, and obviously a great suite of private schools if that's your interest. Next slide. And obviously we have all kinds of sports teams here. We have an MLS team. We have the Blue Jackets. We have, of course, the Ohio State University professional teams. Now that they're paid for their likeness, and they're all going to be professional athletes. So any given Saturday, you can meet 110,000 of your favorite fans in the stadium, about 150,000 outside the stadium. So we have all kinds of great lifestyle here. Next slide. And one of the things that we're particularly proud of is the diversity and inclusiveness. These are just some rankings that we've received from like Forbes and others. But I think one of the things that we're particularly proud of is the list of companies along the bottom, which are headquartered in our market, and they've received a perfect score on the Corporate Equality Index. So not only is it our communities talking about inclusiveness and equality and diversity, but our companies are as well, and they're walking the walk. So.
Well, thank you very much. Unlike the previous speakers, I actually didn't prepare anything, and I actually didn't know I would be here, so I will be brief. My name is Michael Weisbach. I am a professor at Ohio State. I've taught at lots of universities around the country, but I've been here for 13 years, and I really like it. And one of the things I teach that sort of got me integrated with this group is I focus my research and my teaching on private equity, and so I was fortunate enough to come to a lunch at the Columbus Country Club a few months ago and met Mark, and he asked me to come back, and so I got to join you guys at dinner last night and everything. So that the course I teach is actually on private equity, and our goal is to sort of integrate the idea of private capital markets into our curriculum as a business school, but also to educate the students as to how to integrate. I was so happy when I was at the cocktail party last night, and I actually met the Amy that was discussed here earlier, because she was my student at Ohio State, so we did something right, and now she's working for Jobs Ohio, and so such a bubbly personality. She's going to bring all these people from Asia to set up businesses in Columbus. One of the themes I have in some recent work of mine is that I don't think the world has quite figured out how important private capital markets are. So that one way to look at it is like the 20th century was a century in which the major economic development, one of them was the development of public capital markets. And the 21st century, I predict, will be the century of private capital markets. Now, right now, there are about $1 trillion raised worldwide every single year for all different sectors of the private capital market. Of course, I didn't bring any numbers with me, but the the biggest sector is the buyouts, but real estate and the venture capital is certainly one of them. And one of the amazing things that I always think is that if we think about the most important companies in our economy right now, I mean, they were basically all started in our lifetimes, and really in the last 20 or 30 years. Your Amazons and your Facebook and Google, and they're the companies everyone wants to work for, and they're all brand new, right? If we think about the rest of the world, in Japan, they all want to work for Mitsubishi, all these old companies. Where we have in this country, we have all these new companies, and they're really driving the economic growth. And they're also driving regional growth, so that if one of the themes of the previous two speakers was sort of what's going on in Columbus, Ohio, and why is it doing so well. And I can vouch personally that it's been growing. I've been here 13 years, and it's growing like mad. I actually live. I was probably the only one here who walked from his house to this meeting. I live a 10-minute walk up the road on High Street, and so that. And you see there's new restaurants and new businesses, and they're all, they were all mentioned earlier, Rude and Olive and all the companies funded by Rev 1. And so one of the things that I think is key to developing a local economy is actually having private capital money in that economy. And so that the two firms actually that were mentioned by Matt, Drive and Rev 1, they actually feature prominently both in my course and Mark Kwame comes every year and Parker McDonald comes every year and tells our students about it, but also in the development of Columbus. And one of the if you look around the country and you look at which cities have done so well over the years. I mean, you got Austin, Texas, and you got Seattle, and you got the Research Triangle in North Carolina. I mean, forget about Silicon Valley, and that's just insane. But it's the companies where it's the cities where all of the venture money is and where all of the new the new companies are, right? And so that if you have a friend who's trying to buy a house in Seattle, forget it, because you have all of the Amazon people and the Microsoft people, and I mean that's what drives the growth, and that's what's driving the growth here. And so that the one thing I would encourage, if there's any sort of people involved with policy, is that the way to get your city to grow, and certainly the way to get we have drive capital, and one of the things that Mark always says when he's in class, what always surprises me, is that what he wants is to have more VC money come in so he can do deals together. You would think that he wouldn't want to have competitors come into your market, but no. In venture world, you want to have sort of a network of people, and having people come in and do deals together and work for each other. And we've made a huge progress here in Columbus. And if you guys, anyone here is involved with this, the more money can be attracted to firms that are based here and investing in here, I think that's the key to economic growth in this country, in this part of the world. So anyway, I didn't prepare anything, so let me turn it back to Mark. And
But we're going to turn to the VC and innovation panel.
Myself. My name is Mike Nemeth. I'm a great case study, frankly, for all the presentations this morning about Jobs Ohio and attracting people to come here to Columbus. I moved here 10 years ago from New York to take a job inside of a nanotech company that was encouraged to relocate here to Ohio, and was one of their first business employees. So if you can imagine 10 PhDs sitting around an office waiting for someone to do the business stuff, that's what I was asked to do. So it was a lot of fun, and it was certainly a great example of a company that was strapped for resources and leveraged some great opportunities of some non-dilutive state funding to help grow. I worked there for a few years. We saw a partial exit to an international chemical company. And I've subsequently gone on and worked and own a company in the e-commerce tech space. So I'm happy to kind of share on the other side of innovation and venture. And I'm pleased to be up here with Ernie, who Vlad gave me some good background on. Ernie and I don't know each other, so this will be a fun conversation that we'll have. And I did my very basic LinkedIn stalking of Ernie a few minutes ago, so I do have some good questions for him, but I think we'll be excited to see where the conversation goes. Ernie.
Hey, well, first, thanks for inviting me to participate. Very much look forward to the panel here. And, Mike, great to meet you, and looking forward to meeting you, sir. I'm Ernie Knight. I live here in Columbus as well. Been here for about 20 years. Been doing VC investing for, that entire time. Prior to that was in Silicon Valley doing primarily product marketing for startups. Earlier in my career I was in the steel industry, which is a longer story I won't bore you with. Today I am the managing director of Valley Growth Ventures. We're a $6 million micro VC fund based, actually, though I live here in Columbus, we're based in Northeast Ohio, specifically Youngstown. The Valley is short for Mahoning Valley. Though we have an emphasis on investing in Northeast Ohio, we do invest across the state. Half of our capital comes through a really limited partner, investor-friendly program for the state of Ohio. Though we have investors from across the country, I like to say from sea to shining sea, all the way from Silicon Valley to New York and Boston and 11 states in between. We have some unique partnerships with Bon Secours Mercy Health, the Youngstown Business Incubator, Bright Energy Incubator, Youngstown State University, and a group called Valley Partners, which provides some in-kind support. With that, we look at industries and sectors they have expertise in. Includes healthcare, software and IT, energy, advanced materials and additive manufacturing. We focus on doing deals at the seed stage, which really we define as the cusp of market entry. So anyway, that's a kind of a little high level on me and a high level on Valley Growth Ventures. And like I said, look forward to, to offering some hopefully useful perspectives here at this panel. The Voltage Valley kind of is focused in the Mahonian Valley, primarily kind of the Lordstown, Warren, Youngstown area. Lordstown Motors is a big part of that, and there's a whole ecosystem of electrification and, voltage ecosystem that's developed there. We certainly work closely with those groups, as that is our emphasis region, and it's a very exciting time and an opportunity really for significant innovation and a real game changer for the region. But yes, absolutely.
And let's see, what time is it? Good morning still. So my name is Kevin Lloyd. I'm a serial entrepreneur here in the Columbus market, originally from New York City. What I wanted to share specifically is I'm also the co-founder of a company called Color Coded Labs. Color Coded Labs is a boot camp designed to focus on minority communities to help them learn how to code and obviously become engaged in the opportunities that exist in high demand, high tech positions with the goal of increasing their economic stability and generate wealth. The thing that's unique about this is that this company is also co-founded by Mark Kwame. So Mark came up not too long ago in conversation, and one of the things that was mentioned was that he's very interested in the collaboration and investments. And with him coming to Ohio, which he was basically recruited to come here as well and have an impact, he has not only talked about it, but he's actually done that. And I happen to be the recipient of one of those partnerships, as he was able to establish a collaboration between himself, Rev 1, and Jumpstart. Jumpstart is up in Northeast Ohio. I think you probably will hear more about that when you go up to Cleveland. Obviously, Rev 1 is here in Central Ohio. And in collaboration with Mark as well, they decided to invest in Color Coded Labs and gave us our pre-seed in order to really get it off the ground. So Color Coded Labs, we are in the process of our first cohort with 6 members, working on our second cohort already with the goal of obviously filling these positions. Since we launched about 3 months ago, we've had probably 20 plus companies. So a lot of those that were mentioned on the screen during the last presentation from One Columbus, most of those companies have come to the table to hire our candidates. So there's a huge demand, there's a huge partnership, a huge collaboration. So happy to be here today to share a little bit of that story, because it's the reality of what's happening here in Central Ohio.
So we can cover steel and some other background fun. And I'm curious as well for you, the background that led you into Color Code Labs and what brought you here, if we can dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah. Say that again, New York. So born and raised in the city. So I was born and raised in Spanish Harlem. I went to Tuskegee University, received a degree in accounting, spent 25 years as a retail executive working for most of the major retailers, and then stepped into the entrepreneurial world in full speed in 2018. My background that led to Color Coded Labs is I took the entrepreneurial journey. I actually started my first startup in 2005. So I own a couple of different companies. So one of them is the Lloyd's of Columbus, and we own a property called ColumbusBlack.com. So we're the online primary resource connecting the Black community to commerce and culture here in Central Ohio. But we've been used for tourism. We've been used as a recruiting and retention tool by most of the major corporations here in the market as well. That led to a lot of my efforts into technology and innovation, and with some of my partners, as we were taking a look at the ecosystem, we know that there's disparities that exist in technology specifically, and one of our goals was to help close that gap. As we continue to host events here in the market, we realized that there was a demand from a recruiting perspective by a lot of the companies, especially because Columbus is one of the fastest, or has been identified multiple times in the last few years as the #1 startup city, right? And the reason why is because of companies like Cover My Meds. You just heard about Root Insurance. They just went public. And there's a number of other companies coming right behind them. So from a startup perspective, the market is growing extremely fast. There's a huge demand and there's a huge gap. So my partners and I, in collaboration with Mark, sitting down having some conversations, recognized that we could help to fill that void, just due to the access to the minority community, the fact that there's a demand there, and we could close that gap. So that's how it led into Color Coded Labs.
Ernie, from a talent perspective, right, where you're at and where your companies are at, I saw most of the companies in your portfolio are mostly health, medical sciences. What's sort of the strategy there on either recruiting talent out of Columbus or developing or building talent right in the hometowns of where your companies are at?
Sure, great question. Certainly from a healthcare perspective, the state broadly greatly benefits from some of the best healthcare resources on the planet. Northeast Ohio, you've got the Cleveland Clinic, you've got one of our investors, Mercy Health Systems, Akron Children's Hospital, also an investor of ours. Right here you have Nationwide Children's Hospital, Ohio State Hospital System, Riverside, Ohio Health, and in Cincinnati, you got a number of great hospital systems too. So really those feed, a number of our companies come from innovations. One of our portfolio companies literally is an innovation out of Ohio State based on atrial fibrillation. So there's a great ecosystem there, generates a lot of talent and innovation. On the software side, it was mentioned by the gentleman earlier, there's a number of universities here in the Columbus area, but also in Northeast Ohio, where you have Case Western Reserve, Cleveland State. In our backyard, Youngstown State University has a very strong engineering program. So you just have a lot of talent that has been bubbling up, and we've talked about the attraction piece. So mining talent has, I've been here for now 20 years, as I mentioned. It's greatly improved over time. A lot of the factors that have been discussed kind of drive it, but absolutely the talent is there, and the ecosystems just continue to grow.
So I know we're kind of narrowing in on the talent side, but it does ultimately all the innovation and all the growth doesn't happen unless there's people there to get the work done. Despite rise in automation and AI, I think there's still this undercurrent of we need to find smart people. We need to find people to fill roles inside of our companies. The candidates that you have coming through the lab, where are they coming from? What's inspiring them to join? And then, very curious from my own perspective, how do you keep them engaged versus everyone wanting to become an entrepreneur now that that's the sexy title to have, right? Like, I see this problem happening a lot as people often are trying to start companies just because they feel like that's the thing they should do versus getting the experience inside of other companies. So what are you teaching the people inside of your cohort about putting the work, how to understand like how the landscape is before you go off and do your first thing on your own?
So I'll start with the first part of your question, which is where are we sourcing the candidates from? The cool part is when you think about what happened last year with COVID, this whole virtual world gives us a little bit more flexibility, right? So when we initially started the concept, it was going to be face-to-face and in person. Obviously, we had to slow things down because of everything that happened, and then we decided to go hybrid, where it's virtual/in person, which gave us a little bit more flexibility. So out of our 6 candidates, actually one of those candidates is in Florida and is able to participate. But when we do in-person events, like we have an event this evening, she's actually here in town for that event. But otherwise, we still have the ability to teach and train. The rest of the candidates really just came through our network, right? So through promotions and marketing and letting people know about what we were going to do. There are a lot of people interested in different opportunities. They want the opportunity to work for, what we find that's interesting is it's not just learning tech, it's the opportunity to work for the companies that are willing to hire them from our program. So that's actually very compelling to them to have the opportunity to work for a Root Insurance or a Nationwide or a JP Morgan Chase who's saying we want to hire these particular candidates. So that's a value proposition for them. In regards to their focus around, going through the program and then getting a job and getting the experience before becoming an entrepreneur, it really comes down to, I think, our reinforcement. So what we decided to do was coin this as an HBCU style boot camp. So in essence, we're providing a lot of support and engagement. So every week there's interaction and engagement with these candidates versus the normal online, processes that are there. So for instance, we use Udacity as the curriculum platform. However, we reinforce it with a lot of engagement. So for instance, last night we had a social activity where we went out to Pins and Condados and had a great time with them. That's really important. And then we provide them with soft skills training. So we have experts and mentors that are supporting them with soft skills training so when they do get their jobs, they can be successful. And I think that's helping us to guide them down that path toward the corporate opportunities and the fact that these jobs are waiting versus, hey, just jump out and become an entrepreneur. And if they decide to do that, we'll still be able to support them, but we're trying to get them on track for these opportunities.
Can you talk about the recruiting path that you have on getting companies to start recruiting your candidates? Because that's the two-sided sort of marketplace there that you have to deal with.
Yeah, so this is another part, by the way, where Mark was able to help us out, right? So obviously being a person, he is in the market, we were able to do a survey to see where the demand was before we started the program, so a little research. And we've been able to engage those companies on the front end to validate their interest. And now we continue to engage them, so we brought them up to speed. Tonight, what's going to happen is they'll have an opportunity to meet, it's a select group of those companies that'll have a chance to meet the candidates. So that's how we're already bridging that gap. And one of the things that I learned throughout my entire career in retail is, you can go to a career fair at a college or university, right? But that's after the fact, right? The goal is to have an interaction with the deans of those schools, the professors, so they can handpick and cherry pick the candidates that are fit for your company. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're literally handpicking and identifying these candidates, helping to identify a match and fulfilling those positions. The goal is to continue to do that, but to be able to scale that as well.
Yeah, I'll actually hop right in on the same topic. You were talking about kind of how do we build the ecosystem, how do we get more entrepreneurs, cultivate the next generation. We've taken a little bit of actually a similar tact. I really resonated what you were saying. We have internship programs that we run. We work with about 40 universities around the country, but a real focus on the Midwest. And we run internship programs with a select number of those universities where they kind of get experience working with us in getting both exposure to the investment side. Actually, we think entrepreneurs should get exposure not just to the operating side, but they're going to be good entrepreneurs. They actually need to make sure they know what a cap table is and make sure they don't get taken advantage of. Not all investors are, so most of us hopefully are good investors, but there's some out there that might take advantage of an entrepreneur. So you want to really give them that exposure in addition to the operating experience. And some of those folks end up joining our team, but the vast majority of them go back off. Some of them stay in academia ultimately, and actually hopefully will spin technologies out of their labs. And many of the others will go on and become entrepreneurs and hopefully help to build the local ecosystems that they're in. And if they have the tools that they need from hopefully, working with an organization, they'll be able to actually stay in their home ecosystem and do more of that rather than sort of having to go off to a big city where there's already a ton of entrepreneurs to kind of get that mentorship. So if we give it to them while they're in school, hopefully they stay local. Sure, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on the topic, but I run a company called Orange Grove Bio, and essentially what our business is a biotech holding company. We work with universities across the country to help those universities spin those technologies, mostly in the therapeutic space, out of the university and build them into new companies. We then actually leverage our team to actually run those companies. So rather than trying to find the one-off entrepreneur to build each one of these businesses, which is the traditional venture model, you bring the money and then hope that there's a good entrepreneur, we actually try to bring the entrepreneurial talent alongside of the capital and get things going. And then obviously over time, as those companies grow, they'll build more and more of their own infrastructure. But in those earliest days, we kind of try to lend them, let's say, a helping hand and provide a lot of the infrastructure they need. And so for us, the more we can get those ecosystems up and running in different parts of the country, these venture ecosystems, the better it is for everybody, right? The more we can find local talent to then fill in those companies, and maybe the less we have to kind of export in from elsewhere.
So perhaps this question's a bit biased from my own background in aerospace and some other larger ecosystems where there's a heavy presence of the government, some sort of state customer, not just state involvement, but from the perspective of helping your companies mature and grow and finding customers outside of just typical B2B, but B2G. Are you seeing that here in Ohio as an advantage, a disadvantage? Kind of talk about the other customers that you guys have, when dealing with government customers, supporting your projects.
Yeah, so government's a very, very big part of our business, right? It comes at really two levels. You have the federal government level where guess what? Most biotech research in this country ultimately comes back to the NIH and other government agencies. And I will say that Ohio stacks up really well, and actually so does a lot of the rest of the Midwest. There's a lot of big research institutions. They are getting billions and billions of dollars from the federal government every year, and it's kind of a little, maybe a very well-known secret that that's where a lot of this innovation is coming from. Additionally, I'll say, I mean, we've made a big bet on Ohio. We've actually moved our headquarters from New York to Cincinnati because the Ohio state government is just so forward-thinking, is putting resources to bear in the biotech sector. And we look at them as a partner. We also look at government agencies ultimately as customers, right? We ultimately can sell products if we develop certain drugs to the Army, to other government agencies. So there's kind of multiple different levels in which we're interacting with government. And so making sure we get that support at both the federal and the state level is so critical. Just looking at kind of the macro landscape, I'll also just throw in there, as we've kind of moved back to a world of kind of onshoring, and especially with kind of strategic industries, being a U.S. focused and based research focused organization really puts it at the forefront of where a lot of both state and federal government energies are going, right? There's really a real push to say, you know, we went through this whole COVID period, and people recognize that actually being able to both innovate new vaccines close to home and then manufacture them close to home is actually a very important strategic advantage and almost necessary. And so I'd say a lot of organizations like ours are sort of net beneficiaries of that kind of shift in policy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I will say that a commercial customer is probably preferable to a government customer. Certainly we've had a strong partnership with the state government in particular with our fund, but government customers can be, they can change with administration, they can change with policy. So there's a little, an extra layer of risk that's involved when thinking about government as a venture customer. You like to think, particularly in the B2B space, that customers will be reasonable actors, right? I mean, they're driven by ROI, they're driven by profit, they're driven by whatever it is, and if you provide them a must-have valuable product or service, they're going to want to pay for it. In the case of governments, that is driven often by political factors and other things that are a little add to the risk. That said, particularly at the federal level, if you're able to attract a government contract, it can be very lucrative. That can be hard to obtain. One great example, one of our portfolio companies it's based here in Columbus, founded by a professor in the electrical engineering department called Data Anchor. They have a cybersecurity product that is a very strong fit for what's called CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Compliance that all Department of Defense vendors are going to need to comply with. So, we see a real opportunity there and are really leveraging that into the space. So, when you can find an opportunity, it's great, because once you can get there, it can be really sticky. But there are, added challenges when you're thinking about the government, market and the risk it creates.
Mark, we good for maybe one more question for each panelist? Awesome. Well, I'm going to put you guys on the spot, because I think oftentimes we try to be completely professional and keep everything. Tell us something that you're happy about, that you want to brag about inside your organization, right? Like just a win, right? Like this year and the 18 months have been tough. We always talk about the problems that we're facing. So let's end on a positive note. Tell everybody just a good win that you're proud of. Hey, this is what we got done. And then to make it really concise and simple for everybody, let everyone know here's how I can help you, and here's perhaps how you guys could maybe help us.
That is a loaded one for sure. Because clearly we've been through a lot in 2020, 2021 has come through roaring. And I'll try to keep it as sweet and short as possible. But as a serial entrepreneur, I have a few of these, right, that's going on. But I'll start with Color-Coded Labs. I think what I'm most excited about is all the learnings that we've had in such a short amount of time. The amount of demand and interest in what we're doing is, I mean, at points, it seems overwhelming. It's not as exciting. So that will probably be one of the key victories. So I think we recognize from a local market, or not a local market, but from a product market fit, is 150%, right? The demand is there. And then while there's still some challenges of identifying enough candidates to meet the demand, we've also identified some resources that can help us identify that pipeline and secure that talent as well. So those relationships are coming through. So I'm really excited about that. Outside of that, what I didn't get to share is I also own another company. It's called MILE, which stands for Make Your Life Entertaining. It's an entertainment software and lifestyle data analytics company. And we have launched a platform to help people find things to do, places to go, and food to eat right in the palm of their hand, right? So leveraging machine learning, artificial intelligence, and some of the most recent technology. And we're about to launch that and scale it nationally. So we're right in that point. We just got funded for our pre-seed round, so we're just at that point of really getting ready to scale and get it out there. So that's like super, super exciting for us right now. So I'll invite everybody to go to mile.com. That's myle.com. That's my shameless plug. In regards to, got to do it, right? I'm an entrepreneur. So in regards to what I need and how I can help you all is really that support, right? Whether it's with Color Coder Labs, whether it's downloading Mile, spreading the word, doing our campaign. Those are the simple, easy ways you can help me. The way I can help you all is, I know a lot of you may be interested in this particular market. I'm an ambassador for the city of Columbus, very well connected here, have a lot of relationships. And when it comes to deal flow or opportunities or networks, I can be a resource to help you in any way that you need. I enjoy doing that. I enjoy connecting. And if there's a need here, I'll be willing to help.
Thank you.
So in terms of the proud win, I'm going to start generally and then focus in more specifically, which does mean I'm going to talk long, though that does set the prelude that I would, doesn't it? When the pandemic started, it was a scramble, and we are very active investors generally, and we got more active. I mean, we got very operational. And if you would have told me, in June of 2020 that, our entire portfolio would survive, I would have not believed you. Well, I'm very happy to say our portfolio has survived. Are all of them, potential unicorns? No, but they're all alive. They're all well positioned and ready to take the next step. We were able to make the adjustments we needed to make. And then specifically, though I've been doing venture capital investing as an institutional VC for some time, Valley Growth Ventures is a first-time fund. And the biggest win for a first-time fund is your first exit. And we had our first exit in March. Investors made money. Did they all go buy yachts based on the returns? No, but they all had a positive return. I can't say how much because it's confidential, but very proud to get that first one in the door, particularly coming out of a pandemic. In terms of how we could be helped, I mean, we're a venture fund, right? So we're always looking for deal flow. Though we are Ohio focused, we do have the ability to invest outside of Ohio. It's not our sweet spot, but we do. But deal flow is always welcome at the seed stage. And we've talked a lot about talent. If you know entrepreneurs or people that want to be involved in startup businesses and have skills, we'd love to find a way to introduce them to our portfolio companies and the companies that we work with in the Mahoning Valley. How can I be helpful to this group? That's maybe a tougher question, but I'll throw something out there. In my career, I've done venture investing and worked with companies as an entrepreneur, not just in Ohio, but also on both coasts. So I'm probably one of the few people that can really speak directly to the differences between investing on the West Coast, East Coast, or the Midwest. And it is different, right? It's really a different model that you typically think about. You can generate returns that are venturable and risk-adjusted return for the asset class in both cases, but the approach and the model are different. And I'm always happy to speak and give thoughts on what those differences are and the pros and cons to different regions in the venture asset class. So.
Great. So I'll try to keep my comments relatively brief. Sounds like a lot of folks have accomplished a lot in COVID. It's impressive to see. We're a little bit of a different business, right? We actually got ourselves launched right at the eve of COVID. So we immediately had to figure out how to build and grow a business during COVID. And so one of the businesses that I was very excited about, it started out actually as a COVID response, right? It's a company called Aselixa Bio, came out of technology out of University of Michigan. And the idea was actually to develop a therapy that would be able to help with very sick COVID patients. It's actually a platform that has a lot of other disease areas that it can be focused on, including acute respiratory distress, which is where we've sort of moved it into as sort of the COVID crisis has kind of ebbed and flowed. It still potentially has some use there. But I like to think about the fact that we were able to very quickly ramp something up to try to be helpful during that pandemic period. And that's a company that actually was able to pivot a few times and continue to be strong and actually come out even stronger on the other side of COVID today and entering clinical trials pretty soon. In terms of kind of the other big accomplishment I would say is we went from an institution that was only working with a handful of universities at the start of the pandemic to one that's working with over 40 institutions today, and we did that all via Zoom. So as much as I prefer and appreciate the fact that we're all able to be here in person, and a lot of business is better done when you can go face to face, you can accomplish a lot on Zoom calls, and I think the pandemic really taught everybody the ability to do that. In terms of how you can help us, well, we're new to the Ohio ecosystem. We're new to Cincinnati, where we're building our headquarters. We have a lot of hiring needs there now that we're shifting our focus. We're bringing some of our talent from the coasts, but obviously want to find a lot more talent locally. So have a long roster of people I'm looking for. So if folks know of good lawyers, accountants, biotech professionals, we're looking for all of them right now as we scale our team locally. And how I can be helpful to all of you is what we've noticed actually from really conversations with investment groups all around the country. A lot more people are interested in biotech. They don't know, it's a kind of a boogeyman. It's a scary industry if you aren't really deep in it, and so a lot of people have shied away. I think people are starting to inch into it a bit more because returns there have just been so fantastic over the past 7-8 years. Would love to talk to any of you about biotech investing broadly, not even for our business. I mean, great if you want to participate in one of our portfolio companies, but if I can be helpful to get you comfortable to start inching into that industry, it's one that's going to continue growing for many years to come, and would love to just see more investors in that industry in general.
Thanks. So I made Vlad a bet that I could get one question out of this very interactive audience that we've had so far this morning. So now I'm putting you guys on the spot. Put down your phones, take a second. I'm going to look for one volunteer to ask this fine panel an insightful question that's just burning a hole in your mind. Any takers? All right. I won't tell you how much I just got from Vlad. And you're not a plant, right? You're not. I didn't plant you. We don't know each other. All right. Let me get out there and get you the mic. I think they need it for audience.
Luke Timpey, just quick question. For the panelists, I know you guys talked about just the pandemic a little bit. Like, what was the toughest situation dealing with the disruption just in that space? Just kind of curious.
Thank you.
All right. So on my end, I think, wow. So each of the endeavors, I would say 3 out of the 4 endeavors that I'm tied to came to a halt, right? So fortunately, the one that didn't, it took off, fortunately, but tied to a co-working space. So guess what? Nobody was coming out to work in an office during COVID. So we literally put the brakes on and couldn't open up for over a year. And this was a newly founded co-working space. With Color-Coded Labs, everything was put on hold as we were trying to shift from in-person to figuring out how to do it virtually. And we finally got that off the ground, but that was put on hold as well. And then with Mile is all about entertainment. Well, everything completely stopped entertainment-wise, and then it went online. So we quickly shifted, but in-person events stopped in most of the country. But we were able to see those trends. So yeah, exactly. So that was the biggest adjustment, was really just being patient. With Mile, we decided to just innovate and do everything we wanted to do. So by the time COVID was done, we would be relevant for what was needed. With Color Coded Labs, we obviously shifted to a hybrid. And then with the co-working space, we had to wait. So it was, but you think about going through the mental shift of how do I pivot or adjust, tweak the model to still be successful and then figure it out. And it was just really unique. The thing about it is that it's still so much ambiguity in what we do today, and you just have to continue to kind of ebb and flow as you need to. So it was a lot of learnings that came from it.
And you're still here.
Well, I guess the unfortunate truth is this is an easy question for me to answer. One of our portfolio companies, Medisync, provides business intelligence and predictive analytics software to nursing homes. So if you recall, right at the beginning of the pandemic, you couldn't get in a nursing home, right? I mean, it was the hotbed of infections, and I mean, literally, it's hard to sell software when you can't go on site, and they're trying to deal with a large amount of death. The pipeline halted. In order to keep them afloat, they did what good entrepreneurs did and do, and they agreed to cut down their salary significantly. We extended payables. We cut, everything we possibly could to extend runway. And they didn't get a new customer for the first, 7 months. Luckily we were able to do some creative things, and now they've generated, 4 new customers, and recently the largest customer in the history of the company. So, they're stabilized, and we're now with each new customer slowly increasing salaries to bring them over time back up to where they were. We gave option grants to the engineering team to keep them aligned and on board, and we've not lost anybody, which is a real testament to the fortitude and the belief that the entire team across the board has. But it's tough, not only when you have a pandemic, but you can't even get into a customer, and they lived every day worrying about a phone call from current customers that they were going to stop paying, right? I mean, that they're going to lose customers through no fault of their own. They just couldn't afford it anymore. But luckily, they haven't lost any customers. They've had some delayed payments here and there, but they were able to keep their customer base. But that was the toughest story for us. We had a software company selling to nursing homes, and not a place you wanted to be for the first several months of COVID, or even now. I mean, I wouldn't recommend anybody invest in that space.
So you would think the biotech industry would be kind of booming during COVID, and certain subsegments of the market certainly did. What I'll tell you is getting drugs approved is a very intensive regulatory process. And when everyone is scrambling and trying to solve a global crisis, that regulatory process starts to break down. The FDA stops being responsive to everybody who is not solving a COVID drug. Cancer is not really important when you're fighting a crisis. And so most things kind of ground to a halt for a good number of months during 2020, and you just couldn't get responses from government agencies. You couldn't get things through. Clinical trials just stopped, right? You couldn't recruit patients because you couldn't make sure that those patients would be safe going into the hospital and getting treatment. And so I'd actually say probably the bigger tragedy of it, not put aside our own portfolio and our own business, is there were a lot of patients out there who were not able to enroll in clinical trials for diseases like cancer, heart disease, et cetera, or even get their treatments because of COVID. And so we talk about the number of COVID deaths, and actually that's far dwarfed by the number of people who died not being able to get other treatments for other diseases because we were so busy fighting this crisis. So it really had a lot of negative knock-on effects for not just for our business, but I think just for humanity. And obviously, I know we're all coming out the other side. I want to end on a bright note that thankfully things are normalizing and the industry is recovering, and a lot more people are going out for treatments. We're seeing hospital people going in for kind of more elective surgery is really picking up, which is a sign that people are getting helped rather than suffering in silence. So.
Mike, I'd like to, one of the earlier questions was one of your best wins, and we have a win I want to highlight from a fund manager / entrepreneur.
Thank you, Mark. Barry Adams, Prairie Crest Capital, managing partner. First of all, I've been with Mark since the beginning of 360, and it has grown tremendously, and the family has grown, and I want to thank you all for participating here in Columbus. This is my second time to Columbus, thanks to Vlad. Prairie Crest Capital is more in tune with Orange Grove Bio, and the fact that we really like to commercialize university technologies and deep science and bring them to market. But it's not always that easy. And it's not always that easy because scientists don't necessarily make great business people, as you can attest to. We found a company through our process, and our process is identification first, and then marketability, and then we bring them into a collaborative event where multiple investors can see, poke, feel. We did this conference with Pioneer as our lead sponsor. From there, we identified natural fiber welding. Natural fiber welding at that time still is led by a scientist, but they had no customers. Great technology, no customers. And their three promises to the market was vegan leather, vegan plastic, and the third was a cotton material that was 100% cotton, but had the qualities of polyester. It was at a Bradley University. We met them in 2017, brought them into our conference, and we literally had to coach them into how to bring this company into the marketplace with real customers, real clients, and everything else. The challenge was, because it was vegan leather and vegan plastic, we had one company, JBS as an example, looking at this company as a defensive investment because they had the biggest cattle producing company in the world. And this company, instead of leather, was vegan leather, so that was a defensive kind of investment that we looked at initially for this company. But what we found is that it was not just the angel investors that came to the fore, but it was three strategic partners in each different category. And finding those strategic partners under NDAs was really the challenge. So natural fiber welding, for the vegan leather, our first strategic partner to invest in the company was Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren came in, and we started really small, guys. Ralph Lauren came in for leather patches on their jeans, all right? And then in 2019 at the 360 event, I introduced natural fiber welding to the 360 family. And at that time, Ralph Lauren brought in three Italian purse makers to New York City. And we made purses by hand with vegan leather. And that led to a $5 million investment from Ralph Lauren. So once Ralph Lauren came in, Smart Shirts came in for the 100% cotton. And Smart Shirts is from Southeast Asia, but they make branded shirts. And those branded shirts you would know as Calvin Klein, Kenneth Cole, and others. So we had the cotton material, $4 million investment from Smart Shirts. We got $5 million from Ralph Lauren. And the third one in the original round was Allbirds. Allbirds came in for their all-natural vegan shoes. So we had three categories to start off. At that time, we started getting a lot of demand. And what happened is we had to change our business focus, because in the beginning, we would go with small brands who could make quicker decisions rather than these corporate brands. But once the corporate brands came in, we couldn't afford to do that and maintain our business model. And so we closed the first round at $71 million last August. And we went back to the marketplace in February with a round priced at $200 million. So between August and February, we had a triple. At the $200 million round, we got investors such as BMW for cars. BMW's main interest was when you put leather in cars, you waste approximately 35% of the leather due to the cutting. With vegan leather, you don't waste anything because you make it to specification. So there was a big, huge savings in the car industry. We thought we had a deal with Porsche first, but BMW came in first. So at that $200 million round was February. In July, the banks, which are starting to come into the VC space earlier, came in and valued natural fiber welding between $450 and $500 million. Now, the important part is a couple things. One, commercialization of technology from college universities. Two, bringing those college technical advances to a customer base. Three, protecting the IP so that you have it. And then scalability. So the reason we invested in natural fiber welding was they solved a problem that was big enough. They had the scalability, which is the most important aspect. And we felt we could introduce them to the customers, which they couldn't necessarily do on their own when they started. The things that we look at are, as a firm, are size of problem, people, because in our business, there's a trust factor that has to go both ways, and we don't overlook that. And that part takes time to build. And the third part we look at is, can we have a collaborative investment base of friendly capital? Because there are going to be hiccups. The hiccups with this company, Natural Fiber Welding, is that they were so focused on sustainability and the research and being right that they wasted, 6 months trying to prove to the Gates Foundation that this was the best thing in sliced bread. And they wasted, a whole white paper putting together for breakthrough energy and all that stuff. And we said, guys, let's focus on the customer and everything else will come back to us, right? So we had to make that little tweak in how they approached their business. But I just wanted to share with you one of the 360 wins in the 360 family of natural fiber welding. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yes, sir. The answer is absolutely. Just the way they could do cotton and think about their cotton products, think about 100% cotton with the qualities of Under Armour. They can do the same thing with hemp, and we've had this discussion. There's a little bit of difference in the touch and feel, but right now we're trying to find that first customer for the hemp piece without losing our acceleration in the marketplace.
Isn't that an awesome story? It couldn't happen to a nicer guy who just moved back to New York, so we're going to see him more. That's good. So,
by the way, Kevin, we call Spanish Harlem El Barrio.
El Barrio, that's right. That's right. Absolutely.
I'm so glad, John, that keep bringing people like Kevin and everybody to our ecosystem. I think you all, who didn't like dinner last night? Well, we have a particular person to thank, Steve Chun. Come on up here, Steve. Steve, I was overserved at dinner last night. No. Steve and I met. We both worked for Senator Bob Dole back in the day, And then we saw each other's pictures on LinkedIn, which is usually 5 years earlier. Were you with Bob Dole? Yeah. He also went to Michigan Law, and a great story. I think I mentioned in Detroit is we work with the family offices on not only to help them look at investments or raise capital, they often have a talent gap. So Nelson Del Rio in Sacramento said, I need a CFO with a real estate background. And Steve has underwritten billions when he was doing that for the learners out of the DC area. So I had one person, bingo. Now you're working with Nelson. But so this is really to you and Nelson. Just want to give you the mic.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed dinner last night. I can't take credit personally. My company, Blockable, was one of the sponsors of the dinner, but again, it was our pleasure, and we hope you all enjoyed it. And certainly with the open bar and the booze flowing, hopefully everyone had a good time.
We had a few other sponsors. Phil Kessler, I think you've seen him. That you're sort of hiding back there. He did our next gen. We appreciate, because Joe picked a good place, but it wasn't cheap. So, but we might be a new tradition. With that, we have another tradition. I think we're on week 77. Stephen Burke, I'm going to ask you to come up, and this great panel, you can stay if you want. He always tells us something that's, what's happening in the markets, macro. But he usually tells me what he's going to talk about. But now, I have no idea what you're going to talk about, so. But I know it'll be good.
So, okay. I got a text on the way in today, or when I walked into the room today, asking if I could say something at 11 o'clock. So, completely unprepared. One of the suggestions from Mark is about business coming to the Midwest. So I'm going to steal something from Nancy Lazard, Cornerstone Macro, who has has a view that the U.S. might be the best, the Midwest might be the best emerging market in the world. And why would that be? Well, obviously, as we've seen from the tour, it's pretty clear that there's a lot of really good stuff going on. But I think from an economic perspective, it goes back to, as Ed was talking about yesterday, the cost of living wage increases that were guaranteed in union contracts in the 70s started to push our manufacturing capabilities to an uncompetitive state, while China at that same time was really starting to take off, and that allowed the shift over to China. Fast forward 30 years, China is now less competitive themselves, and that's actually pushing manufacturing elsewhere. Throw into that, we have supply chain disruptions starting from when President Trump started pushing China on that, and that's created on trade tensions. That created a whole reorientation of supply chains, and when we've started looking at it now, we're bringing them closer to home, making them more resilient, and we're doing it with more just-in-time stuff because companies don't want to be completely tied into just running low inventories and being dependent on the whims of the whole production chain, which is undergoing a massive transformation right now. Add to that, you have the work from home and climate change, which are giving people the options to work in different areas and from the work at home, and it's shifting people from the coast into the Midwest because of the climate change issues. You have great cost of living going on here, as we've seen in the Midwest. You have a large labor force that can be put to work, and I think more will stay home when the benefits of the cost of living really plays through. And you add to that, you have really nice people in the area, which makes it a better place to do business as well. So I think there's a lot of reasons why it's coming back. I also think there are some things that are going on that we don't focus on as much. There is a lot of regulatory certainty in the U.S., even though we have the political wrangling in Washington, D.C. and all that. And what you've seen in China, I think they've put in 155 regulatory changes since the start of the year, and they weren't minor. And that creates a sense of where do you want your rule of law to play through? How do you want to build your business around models that you have less certainty on? And I think we're in an environment where you're pushing for more certainty, which is going to bring more business back to the U.S. I think the other thing that's going on is the manufacturing sector is going through a massive technology transformation that will require a little bit less on labor and more on the technology stacks that are going up, which is going to further enhance the ability for us to compete. And when you do that at the same time, I think China's wages went from, say in 2000, just under 5,000 on a per capita GDP basis, not wages, but per capita GDP, shifted up towards closer to $10,000. And as they're trying to move up the value chain in technology and manufacturing, it's going to be harder for them to be cost competitive. And you're already starting to see that with Thailand, Cambodia, and other countries shifting, seeing production shift there. We think there's going to be a continued push for finding lowest cost of opportunity to manufacture, but also with the highest quality. And I think that also is another benefit of bringing things back to the U.S. So I think from those perspectives, I think there's a really interesting thing going on. It's occurred over a long period of time. And when we have these transitions, it happens very quickly. I'll also add to that, when we started really losing competitiveness in the manufacturing sector, and even up until President Trump lowered taxes from the corporate side, we were at about 35% corporate taxes, and the OECD average was around 25%. So why we're going back above 25%, because I think it's still there right now, and trying to be less competitive is something that you can scratch your heads at with the DC crowd. But I think they're not really clear on what competitive advantages are, and even just moderating the disadvantages. So I think it'd be interesting to see if Manchin wins and we get it back to 25%, or if it's even 26.5 is not the end of the world. But I think that tax change also made us a lot less attractive back then and more attractive now. And if we don't blow it with the next tax changes, I think that's going to be another thing that'll keep us in a competitive state. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. It was not something I was prepared for today. Excellent. I'm sorry, Barry. Go ahead.
I just want to discuss inflation for a minute.
Great. So that's I was going to be my other topic. So I was. You were prepared for that? I was prepared for that. Listen, I think the way the markets work and the way the news works is it always seems that the time we're talking about it getting worse is it's already gotten to the peak. So I remember when I was early in my career, I had a chance to work with, for those old enough to remember Louis Rukeyser on Wall Street Week, he had a guest on regularly called Monty Gordon from Dreyfus, and Monty was a very sage wisdom guy for investors. He had been through the wars, and he told me one day that he was working for Beige Securities, and the head of Beige Securities went out with the head of Ford and came back from the lunch and sold all the stock. He said, sell all the stock. And everyone was like, that was the largest position at the time. Why would you sell all the stock? So they were, who's going to go in and ask? So Monty went in and asked, and he said, what's wrong with Ford? And he said, nothing. The CEO told me things are going to get any better, so they're only going to get worse. So sell the stock. So he jumped out of the stock, and that was actually true at the time. The stock cratered right after that. I think the same thing applies in reverse. When you think things can't get any worse, it's probably already in the news, and we're starting to see changes. And I was talking to Matt Friedman last night, and he was talking about what he's seeing from the auto industry, which is one of the areas that you're starting to see this, and he thinks we're starting to see the easing already. You look at a lot of different prices, lumber and others, that are already starting to come down. So I think I think we're starting to see the transition going. Some of it, Powell was out today saying it's more persistent than he thought, but what is transitory is the definition like, is. I think from the old days, nobody's really defined it, so we have to figure out what it's going to be. Transitory it just means it's not permanent, right? So it can take more than a couple quarters to see that work through, and you're starting to see rolling things going on where you're seeing certain areas come down and other areas accelerating, like energy today and energy in Europe. So I think we have to think about the policies that are going against what's driving inflation. The climate change initiatives make all the sense in the world. The execution of them doesn't. As Ed was pointing out, you can't just wish something to happen if it's not backed up by the economics and the math and all that. And I think that's one of the areas we're starting to see some tension between affecting an appropriate climate change transition or not. And I think we're in right now, the strategy of doing it on a deadline as opposed to with a process is part of what's gumming up the works. But I suspect that the productivity changes that we're seeing, if you have higher inflation for even a little bit longer, will force companies to be more productive because they don't want to be cut in the bind, and that'll create the impetus behind improving the productivity, which will lower the inflation. So I think it's going to be a little more persistent. Powell and Janet Yellen were on the talking to Congress today about the debt ceiling. Powell came up and said it was more persistent than he thought, but it still believes it's transitory. And the strategists that we follow most closely are still in that camp, but there is, you have to drive defensively as well. So it's easy to say it now. We'll have to see. I thought it would be less persistent than it's been already, but there's a lot of other dynamics going on. China disrupting things with the regulations, the European energy crisis. So all those things work against it. I also think all those things work in favor of us bringing stuff back to the U.S. as well. So I think it's kind of all connected, and that's one of the things we've always felt is the interconnection and interdependencies of a global economy are a lot different than we had in the 70s. So we have to be more aware of that, but it looks like people are going to get somewhat a little more insular as well because of the geopolitical dynamics as well as the economic dynamics that are persisting today. So, I hope that helps.
Any more questions? Ideas?
Mark, we do have Phil brought his CIO, so I don't know
Yeah.
if he has something he wants to weigh in on any of the
Please.
stuff. Correct me, please.
Well, Stephen likes, if it happens to him, he wants it to happen to someone else. So you're on the spot now.
Sure, in front of the camera. Good call. Great. My name is Mike Parker. I'm CIO of SWS Partners. Joined SWS in 2017 after spinning out of Ohio PERS, one of the big state pensions here in Columbus. Right now it's a $120 billion fund. I was there on a team of 9 who managed public equity portfolios. So my perspectives, everyone likes to hype their asset class, so my bias is public. However, I think especially today we saw a lot of folks speak and saw a lot of the investments that are happening in Ohio. And you can no longer think in kind of the neat confines of your own market today because innovation happens up and down the cap spectrum. And so I identified the opportunity to basically take the DNA of the team I worked on that was managing public equity portfolios at Ohio PERS and kind of look at it with a clean sheet of paper. And so I spun out of there in 2017 and convinced one of my colleagues to join me there. And today we basically address high net worth family office, but also large institutions as well in the same house. So we just crossed our 3-year track record after getting our flagship strategy off the ground in 2018. And a lot of things I see eye to eye with some of the things we talked about today was a lot of these data centers that are being built by these large public companies. You kind of think about, 10 years ago, the gatekeepers of CapEx were the guys that were, building silicon chips, the guys that were building wireless towers, spending $10+ billion a year to build out these infrastructures. And you think today, a lot of these gatekeepers are Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. Those guys easily spend $20 billion plus a year. And they enable folks that the innovators, the entrepreneurs today to say, hey, look, if I kind of viewed compute intensity as a utility, what things could I build on top of that? And so no longer do you have to kind of think about a budget that's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to go build a compute architecture. You can basically swipe it with a credit card today and rent it, not just the compute hour, but the compute millisecond for pennies on the dollar. So basically that's enabling a whole slew of businesses in the private markets as well as the public markets. And as a manager of public capital, I see it as my job to sort of not be concerned with how its equity is priced, whether it's in the public markets, and today's a great example of some volatility that flows can entail, but understand how entrepreneurs and executives are steering capital to go in pursuit of economic return and economic value creation. So yeah, you just kind of think about, some of the things that we enjoy today, like you think about your home broadband speed, right? In 2013, there was back when healthcare.gov was the big kind of initiative that was trying to get off the ground and think about, enrolling millions of people simultaneously. I think average broadband speeds then were 15 megabits per second to the home. And you think about today, we're we're broadcasting live on Zoom without issue, you know, and broadband speeds are very different today. So you have whole new businesses that could be created that just 7 years ago failed miserably when it had to go from zero activity millions. Now, you know, you have multiple millions of people that's basically broadcasting via video. That's all being enabled by these corporations that are steering capital to build these infrastructures that entrepreneurs can build on top of. So I'm concerned about some of the things we talked about. Inflation, that's something to pay attention to. There's some bubbles that form in our markets as well. I was just looking at my list of 120 SPAC companies today. There used to be a time we talked about unicorns in aggregate were the size of Microsoft at the time. Today, you think about the SPACs, and that 120 list I have is about 250 billion in market cap itself. You're going to have some bad actors in there for sure, but there's definitely going to be some diamonds in the rough to pay attention to. So it's our job as public investors to sort of dig into these companies, get very granular, may have to get some confidence with investing pre-revenue, because whether we like it or not, the artifacts are going to manifest themselves in the public markets. So it's just, as a public investor, you just got to up your game. You have to go deep, you have to go granular, and you have to kind of be focused on the next 3, 5, 10 years of how this is all developing. So I know one of the questions that Mark presents is sort of what gets you excited about the future of your space. And for me, it's like I said, if you could treat your compute intensity as a utility, what cool things could you build on top of that? And that's happening left and right across the public equity market cap spectrum. You just have to be a lot more discerning. You have to do a lot harder work. Kind of the DNA that we borrowed from running money inside of a $120 billion pension, we're now doing here for high net worth family office and other institutions as well. So just a little bit of taste there. You had a question? Yeah, what's scary is it's, data is kind of becoming, is basically the enabler. It's sort of what you're doing with your own data, the insights you're extracting from it. And, I look at the tools I use at my desk and my phone today, and these are basically tools that, the most sophisticated investors would pay millions of dollars to get access to 5 or 10 years ago. So there's sort of this, democratization of these tools that basically any information I want is at my fingertips. So it's upped your game in terms of having to kind of drink out of the fire hose and make sense of it. The perception is that that's messy and that's hard to find, insights and hard to find an edge. But the reality is that, again, you can kind of, see where this is all going, develop a thesis, and the key thing is just not to take the head fake, because the head fake's coming, and it's coming in higher frequency. It's coming, with just, higher swings today. But the underlying goal, like I said, is trying to basically create economic value with incremental allocations of capital and generating a cash flow off that capital. So it's my job to figure out what the price of that will be 3 or 5 years from now. But it's just sort of lifting the floodgates essentially on every source of information that previously you kind of had to have proprietary sources for. So.
Mark, I just wanted to add one thing on the inflation discussion, because it gets lost. When we're growing at 6%, 5%, whatever it is this year, and inflation's growing at 3%, if you keep a ratio like that, you can live with a little inflation, because what's going to happen is, and this is part of the job you were talking about, digging in, some people are going to benefit from this big. Companies who can pass on pricing in this environment are going to see higher earnings and higher revenues that are going to come back to them and in a big benefit. The other side of it is higher wages flow through to higher consumer spending, which actually continues to improve the economy too. It also improves their net worth. So you have to look at it in the context of what's the rate of growth versus the rate of inflation as well. And if we were running at the growth rates we had been pre-COVID, that would be a real issue, seeing this spike up. When it's somewhat a positive delta on it, it makes it a little bit more less of a concern if you can keep that element of it. So I think that's an important part. And the last thing I'd say about innovation, when we were in this tour and I hear all the stuff you guys are doing with these new technologies, new businesses, new ways of thinking about it, it is that innovation that's going to drive this economy forward, and it's what gives me the excitement and the hope about what's ahead of us, as opposed to the fears about whether Washington screws everything up or whether, we have all these other issues. I think if we continue to innovate the way with the businesses like you guys are doing, there is no stop to what this economy can do. So I think that's the issue. And a lot of these are anti-inflationary technologies that you're developing. I think that's the other thing that one of the takeaways that I have as I leave this event and all the different cities we've been in and where we're going in Cleveland today to see the innovation that's up there. And that's what's the productivity improvements are the antidote to inflation. And if we continue to be productive and continue to innovate, we can manage the inflation issues if we have reasonable policies behind that. So I'll stop there.
Sure, great question. And then for the webcast, going from an asset owner to an investor, just from the pension to where we're now at SWS. I joined PERS when Lehman was going bankrupt. So the financial crisis was pretty much my first week in 2008. And it kind of taught me the value of patience and stability in sort of your time horizon, right? So all the contagion that was happening, getting your arms around that, you kind of compare and contrast that to the endpoint that we're trying to solve for today, which is how much precision can we get on a virus that's going through mutations and stay ahead of that and answer that question. It allows you to kind of see through a lot of that and basically kind of look at the next 3 and 5 years out and beyond, because every board hires their management teams with that perspective of how they're going to innovate and basically drive shareholder returns. And so it pretty much allowed me to put myself at the same table as those allocators of capital in the companies that we invest in. So the time horizon sort of was a big benefit of thinking longer term, but also not having a shoulder tap when volatility intra-month happens that you have to make a decision based upon a flow. So that entity when I was there was roughly $75, $80 billion, or $120 billion. They're basically trying to solve for a liability stream that is pension retirees payments across their lifespan. Every investor pretty much does that either implicitly or explicitly, and they're all trying to solve for a hurdle rate of return, somewhere in sort of the high single digits. At that entity, it's I think 7.75%. So every investor is trying to achieve a hurdle rate of return, but also needs some aspect of liquidity. And so it's very difficult to achieve that hurdle in fixed income and overnight rates. The interest rate environment just doesn't support it. So you have to kind of go higher risk, but you want some aspects of liquidity, and that's exactly what the public markets do. There is a huge pendulum shift, though, to just indexing right now. And what's really, really interesting is the context of that mass exit at the passive. We just crossed the parity point in 2019 when passive assets were roughly $4.8 trillion in the mutual fund and ETF market. They reached parity with active in 2019. They're still heading in that direction, but what it tells you is that everyone just sort of has given up on finding ideas and stock picking, to the tune of 4x trillion dollars that's invested in passive. And it really tells you that there's rocks to be unturned in the public markets. Like I said, it just requires a lot more work and a lot more sifting through noise. But those are aspects that I don't see going away, that I appreciate and borrow from that entity, and sort of thinking that same time horizon, the same perspective. So that kind of answer your question? Great. Sure.
Public and private. I know that there's a certain mindset. You guys had a ton of money to put to work, so the check size had to be, X amount. But just, I think particularly within this audience would be really interesting to hear your thoughts on larger versus smaller guys.
Absolutely. That's a great question, because that was a big part of, again, the clean sheet of paper of being able to build it on the outside without any biases. There is sort of this, kind of movement to sort of, as you scale with AUM, we need to be able to show our investors that we have scale via headcount. And what a lot of managers fail to do is they go and invest and populate their portfolios with very forward-thinking, very entrepreneurial mindsets, and then turn around and run their teams in the very opposite fashion. A lot of hierarchy, a lot of idea generation friction. The problem is with large institutions, sometimes you create unintended, sometimes intended, sort of friction points where if an analyst is trying to find an idea, meets with the management team, studies the S1, the company goes public, the ability to kind of have that view manifest itself in a portfolio position, there's a lot of things that can get dropped along that path. And so from our perspective, as we contemplate scaling our business to multi-billions of dollars in the future, we've thought through very careful ways to avoid a lot of those frictions. But the counter side of that is the resources you can get, the access you can get. It's just, you're able to up your game on the research side of things as well. So it's larger can very much, you don't see it as an investor with, I won't pick on the names, but the large guys that have trillions of dollars themselves, they pride themselves with pods of analysts who can give you granularity on any given company you want. But the reality of like those granularities populating the portfolio and finding a portfolio manager who will listen to that person, there's just a lot of things that happen, balls that get dropped. And so there are definitely ways to run an asset management business where you just kind of create a horizontal structure and again, ingest the portfolio ideas and then populate the portfolio with the best ideas across the entirety of the team. So that's size can be helpful, but also it can be a detriment.
Here we go. One more question.
One more back there.
Oh, no.
Stretching out. Great. Thanks for your time.
I just want to share. We've taken a lot of photos. I just thought it'd be interesting to see what we've done in Chicago. Here, give me a second to tee that up. There's one picture of you, Bill Doikler. I'll skip over quickly. Now, how do I do this? 1 second. I remember doing our first Zoom, there was a big pregnant pause when I did something wrong. You guys were kind to me, and I learned I got better. 1 second. Anand's much better at this. All right, so we started in Chicago. I could just keep my mouse there. So here we are in Chicago with Lauren Taylor. Got a bus. I'll show you. It's just an urban prairie. So much opportunity, but a lot of soul. That theater had its heyday. So Yvette was being honored. There's Byron Allen in the top right so this is part of the South Side tour. That's the ocean as you walk, lake, excuse me. Yes, it feeds into an ocean eventually. This was our opening panel in Chicago. We had the former CIO from the state of Illinois, and Ted Keening and others of the panels. And my friend is now working. The city of Chicago has a $750 million fund to support the South and the Southwest sides. LaForce Baker. If you're born with the name LaForce, you have to live up to the name. Also Denison alum. Here we were we didn't do a picture yesterday, we should have. So we did a picture in Chicago. If you have a minute, Andrea, she apparently is good at pickleball. At least she wears it, brings it with her wherever she goes. Old friends, haven't seen them since Moscow days. Ping pong. Maybe a little ping pong tonight? I think so. And then a picture, Chicago, Detroit. We had the lieutenant governor being interviewed by Gary Bowles. And Peg's one red shoe. So there's some videos. We'll post all these. This is the, I believe, venture panel in Detroit. Then on to Ann Arbor. Thank you, David Hinkle, for driving. We'll see him did it tonight in Cleveland. She was great. She's a junior at Michigan. She just came up. She started the Green Wolverines. It's a nice picture. Too bad Sheila couldn't be with us since Cincinnati. We've had beautiful weather, by the way, this whole tour. So that was fun. Ann Arbor. Oh yeah, they're doing shots there. Notice that I'm not doing a shot. Let's see. Continuing on. Oh, this is the South Side tour. Very interesting. And then we're in Ann Arbor. The strange statue that just begged a picture. Zingerman's, iconic. If you haven't been there, it should be on your bucket list. Oh, this is Jack Wyant. You've probably seen him along the way. This is Zach from the football game. We couldn't be at two places at once. And then, in Cincinnati, at Centrifuse, it's the Venture Hub there, if you know it. And this guy, I mean, I have, I think I've got, I filmed this. This is a shoe. I thought this was unique because it's Go Blue in Ohio. Jack, I'll move faster. This guy pitched the perfect game in 1988. I want to say it was September 17th. And he told a story, which I won't go into, but he was great. Tom Browning. So it was a nice time at the Reds game. Here we are. I don't know where Eddie is, but Eddie forced me to go play ping pong. And you might see some, and these hats. Classic. And there's this game, you have it, I discovered it in Ohio, pins. There's my law school. There's the bus. On top of one of Jack's buildings, you see all of Cincinnati. That's a code of ethics from the 30s. This was it was a cookie factory originally. And Peg, there's Bill. Travis, by the way, if you didn't meet him, played professional football. I should have chosen him as our ringer on our golf. And here we are golfing. There's Mark. Saw him earlier. Fred. This was Grant at Denison. We had Peg Wyant, the first woman in corporate America, spoke about inclusion and as well as mentoring. So we had a lot of students, a few students last night. Denise. And somehow I'm slowed down. We'll make a montage of this soon. Well, the other thing I was showing is that if you're new to us, I guess I get to keep going for a second. This was yesterday. This is at my home, Granville, Ohio. This is Eric welcoming us to the restaurant. This was just out of, it was like a picture wall. I found that interesting. And then this, you didn't see this room. It's all the Ohio State paraphernalia, jerseys and whatnot. That was a lot of fun. And I think I'll let that go. The other thing I was just going to show you was this slide that we have, if you to come join us every Tuesday. What Stephen did is what he does, and here it is. But we want to keep this cadence going. You probably can't see it, but just think every day, every weekday at 10:30, our community gets together. We have by industry briefings. We have a town hall. We do our meetups so that we create events. And someone was asking me, Bill Curtis, how do you create an event? Just what do you want to do? We'll form a circle and get it done. And whether it's about fashion or inflation or whatever it is. And so we do them in the course of deep dives. If you want to interview somebody, I'm trying to say Eric Lindbergh had an idea for an interview. So I just want you to get a feel for this is not mine, it's ours, right? So let's just whatever we want to do is leverage it for yourself and for each other. With that, I might take a nap on the bus, recharge, go full throttle. My former other hometown, Cleveland, it's going to be great. Some old familiar faces and new faces. You saw it with Nottingham Spurk, and there's a guy named Ron Harrington, another billionaire on the biotech side, and several other 100-ish millionaires will be there. And the bus, I think, has a few more seats. So if you, in the next half hour, we're fluid. So if you want to roll with us, you are welcome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Come join our 361 Firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.